Hello and welcome to Smeg and the Femmes, a podcast to discuss Red Dwarf from a different perspective. I'm Jan Amelie, and today I'll be talking about Series 2, Episode 2, Better Than Life, with the help of my guest, the Desolated Quil. Hello again, and sorry I didn't have a chance to say goodbye to you on the last one, but I knew I'd be speaking to you again, so...
It's fine, don't worry about it. It's nice to be back.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, right. So Better Than Life, and we'll leap straight into the opening scene, which is interesting, you know, because it's Rimmer.
Rimmer trying to cook.
Yeah.
Oh dear, the poor. I say trying to cook is basically telling the Scutters to do it for him.
Exactly, yeah. poor Lister and Cat's stomachs.
Yeah. Oh, but it's nice the Scutters that they were willing to give him a hand, though. Literally.
It is, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was interested when I was sort of rewatching this for purposes of this podcast. There's a theme in the beginning of this episode of sort of humanized AI. I mean, obviously Holly, but also the Scutters and Gordon, Holly's fellow computer. And
yeah.
even you could argue Rimmer himself, because he is technically an AI, you know. All these AIs, which they all seem very human to a greater or lesser extent, even the Scutters to some extent.
I think that's one of the real strengths of the show in general, is just how they sort of, like, with the mechanoids, they basically created like a whole sort of second class of people. You know, you've got, like the pecking order goes, you've got like Lister and Rimmer at the bottom, then the machines, simply because they have a union. and then you have the rest of humanity, and then obviously with holograms as well, how they sort of fit into that. It's just especially for a sitcom as well, where they're not necessarily looking into creating that sort of deeper lore. They really put in a lot of effort to have these machines have a whole culture, for lack of a better word. I mean, like in the next series, we find out that they have an afterlife and a religion. It's just and then in this very episode, obviously you have Holly and Gordon playing chess, and the Scutters are part of the John Wayne fan club.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of it's for comedy, but it's also a very fascinating take, I think, on a well-worn sci-fi cliche in a way, I think.
Yeah, and of course it makes the sort of bleakness of their situation, which I didn't get a chance to mention at the beginning of Crichton, Holly's introduction. As the days go by, we come to the conclusion we are alone in a hostile, meaningless universe. Still, you've got to laugh, haven't you?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about this show, is that I think people tend to overlook it because it's a comedy and it's very, very funny. But the world of Red Dwarf is unbelievably bleak. It's like a capitalist dystopia. It's like, I would hate to live in that kind of world.
Of course, it's even bleaker in the books, which we will get onto in a bit. Let me see. Moving on, I think, to the post pod, and the your father is dead or your father is dad scene.
Dad. Oh yeah, again, they really sort of go for the emotional jugular with that, I think, because it's obviously, like, rationally Rimmer must have known that his dad's dead, but to hear that news in a letter, it sort of reawakens these old feelings in him, and it's the whole episode is basically him having to sort of come to terms with his relationship with his father.
Yeah.
And of course, this is the first episode when we have the famous observation pod scenes.
I love the observation dome scene, but I'll get onto that in a minute. But I did just want to point out that, I mean, your father is dead scene. It's very funny, but it's also his mum's sort of ice cold letter, dear Rimmer.
Rimmer, yeah. Is this from your mum?
I hope this epistle will find you adequately healthy to discharge your duties. I mean,
yeah, you could tell they really don't seem to get on.
even
that far back in the show's history.
She addresses a letter to Rear Admiral Lieutenant General Rimmer, but she can't have actually believed that he was a Rear Admiral Lieutenant General.
Oh no, judging by the tone of the letter, I've got a feeling it's sarcastic. It's like, do you honestly expect me to believe you passed all these exams and everything? It's like, come on. But I'm not going to say it because, I don't have time for you. Howard and Frank are, off being successful and you're not.
Exactly, yes. Yeah.
Let him have his fantasy if that's what he wants.
Precisely, yeah. So let's move on to the observation dome scene, which is lovely. I mean, we only get 2 observation dome scenes in consecutive episodes, but the music is so poignant and sweet, and it's just such a lovely way to show them getting closer. I mean, obviously you can read it platonically, and a lot of people do read it platonically, but I mean, whichever way you read it, it's just sweet.
Yes. There is quite again, it's the unintentional homoerotic undertones to it. It's these 2 men getting physically and emotionally closer while looking out over a starlit sky. It's, how could you read that as anything other than romantic? It's, yeah, so I do 100% get why the Slash community love those scenes.
Exactly.
Completely.
Yeah, I'm just going to point out on the audio commentary, Danny John Jules in this scene says, "I always thought to Craig, I always thought you were going up there to ask him for a date."
Well, to be fair, that's probably what it was for. Back when the ship's crew was alive, that's probably where you would, there was where you take your date. Yeah.
It's probably where everyone went, for their sort of romantic. I wonder if you had to book it in advance if you wanted privacy.
Yeah, it's probably like the Greenwich Observatory.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just it's just nice the way they sort of, first Lister opens up about his family and we find out about him, and then sort of Rimmer opens up in return. I mean, of course they do so in very different ways, but it's just, I mean, first we find out that Lister doesn't exactly come from the most functional background either, but then obviously that kind of gets a bit overwhelmed by Rimmer's spectacularly dysfunctional family.
Yeah. Oh, it's dysfunctional doesn't even begin to cover it. It's abusive. It is
exactly. Yeah.
Really, I mean, and we get sort of like hints of that in series 1, particularly with the Me Squared. But I think what makes Better Than Life stand out, I think, in terms of Lister and Rimmer's relationship, is that I think this is the first time we see them both let their defenses down and actually talk to each other like human beings rather than sort of nagging at each other. It's,
I mean, sort of snark at each other or snipe at each other, but I mean, they're actually having a conversation.
Exactly. There's like an attempt on Lister's end to have a proper emotional connection with him. It's like, whereas, Me Squared, it's like, yeah, we had the whole gazpacho soup thing, but it felt very much like a ploy for Lister to get some dirt on Rimmer.
To be fair, it was a ploy. I mean, I think Lister did have some sympathy, but it was a ploy.
Yeah. Whereas this, it's like not just, I mean, obviously the observation dome's the most obvious example, but like the rest of the episode too. I mean, you see Lister inviting Rimmer to join them in the VR suite. That would, before that, Lister would never do that, I don't think. But when that letter arrives, I think that's the moment where something truly shifts, I think, between the two. And you start to see the barriers coming down and they start to, jive a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, of course, obviously it has a lot of sort of blips, but I mean, you're absolutely right. It does. They do start to, and they go into the game, and the first, of course, practically the first thing Rimmer does is to sort of fanboy over Napoleon.
That was such a lovely scene. Yeah. But it also in some ways speaks to his character as well. It's like, again, going back to his abusive father and everything, his whole childhood is basically defined by his lack of control over his own life. And so it kind of makes sense that his idols are dictators, people who have total control over their environment. And so so it's funny, but it's also just very interesting from a character perspective. And
obviously it's a bit
about him. Yeah,
obviously it's a bit disturbing if you think about it too much, but
very disturbing, but makes total sense for him.
It does make sense, yeah. I mean, especially since obviously his father was also obsessed with sort of the trappings of the military in general, and the Space Corps are kind of, the futuristic equivalent of that, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, I was wondering actually, when I rewatched this, why in the episode when Lister goes into the game doesn't he encounter Kochansky? You think he would?
Yeah, that's a puzzling one, because obviously you have Rimmer and Yvonne Magruder, and then you have the cat and the mermaid.
And Marilyn Monroe, yeah.
And Marilyn Monroe. Yeah. Although Cat resists her. That was funny.
I wasn't sure it was supposed to be, he was resisting her entirely, or whether they'd had sex once and now he's bored. I don't know. But yeah.
But Lister is, I think, if we're talking from a writing perspective, I think bringing in Kochansky in would have complicated the narrative a bit too much. Like, they clearly wanted the main focus of it was going to be sort of Rimmer's own sort of self-loathing, and the roots of that with these sort of satellite gags around that, the cat and Marilyn Monroe and, Lister, playing golf and that kind of thing, but it's, I think.
Yeah, I'm not.
I couldn't answer that. I don't know why.
I guess it could be that maybe Claire Grogan simply wasn't available, but I think maybe they just didn't want to push the Kochansky angle into the ground, because they did harp on it a fair amount during series 1. Maybe they thought it was time to imply that he was we're not moving on from her, but putting her to the back of his mind a little bit at least.
Yeah, he's starting to adjust. Yeah,
starting to adjust. I mean, of course, in the book, that completely goes out the window. I mean, I don't know how much you've had time to read of it, and it's fine if you didn't have a chance to read it all. But I mean, obviously in the book, he's married to her in Bedford Falls, and they have kids during Bexley, so that goes out the window in the book. But in the episode, obviously they didn't really have time to get into that.
Yeah. Well, again, with a book, you have more time to really go into these concepts. I mean, if I'm being honest, one of my disappointments with Better Than Life, as much as I enjoy it, is that it doesn't really go far enough with the whole VR concept, and how if you live in a virtual world where every fantasy of yours can come true, would you ever leave it and go back to the real world? And obviously this is a 30-minute episode of a sitcom, so obviously you can't go too deep into it. But yeah, the book really...
The book really sort of dives into it,
head first into that.
A long time in there. Yeah, I mean, we will go back to the book, but for the moment, back to the episode. And of course, back to Rimmer. I mean, the thing with Napoleon is kind of endearing, but I mean, frankly, for me, as soon as Yvonne Magruder appears, his behaviour becomes more and more obnoxious.
It's it's tricky to sort of how to view it, because on the one hand, yes, it's quite icky because of our modern sensibilities, in a sense. Not that it was right back then either, but at the same time, it is very much in character for Rimmer to be a total pig when it comes to
It is,
women.
yeah.
You know, it's like this is the same guy who later on in the series we find out owns a book called How to Pull Women with Hypnosis. You
yeah,
know,
I know, yeah.
this guy is a bit of a misogynist.
I
So,
know, yeah.
but in some ways, that makes it more satisfying when he does get his comeuppance, in a sense.
Yeah, it's like, because he just, his brain, kind of, well, obviously rebels, and it's like, everything is going too well, like, I can't handle this. Although, having said that, it goes badly in the episode, but nowhere near. I mean, in the book, it goes spectacularly.
Well, the book goes really far, yeah, to the point where I was actually getting really uncomfortable reading it, and I'm sort of going, oh, I'm glad this didn't make it in. It's
I know. Very... I mean, are you thinking of the bit where he's in the body of Trixie LaBouche?
Yeah, that is. I can't even begin to describe that. It's
disturbing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, very disturbing. Yeah, and I'm not 100% sure whether it's there just for shock value or if they were actually going somewhere with that. But yeah,
I think from what they say, and when they have Rimmer they do actually have Rimmer in the book come to a realization, oh my God, I am a bit of a misogynist, aren't I?
Yeah.
I think Rob and Doug were attempting to make a point about, Rimmer being put in a female body, made him realize how sexy he was. I mean, of course, because it's in the book, it's confined to the book. It doesn't carry over to the series. But I mean,
well, at least Rob Grant and Doug Naylor clearly have some self-awareness when it comes to the inherent sexism of the character, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously they do try that out in parallel universe as well.
Yeah, we could have a whole discussion about that, but again, whole other.
Obviously, this is we're not talking about that episode at the moment. But you can't sort of not think of these episodes, because having watched the whole show and read the books, there is no doubt that Rimmer has severe sort of misogynist problems.
Yeah. Probably as a result of his mother, I think, as well. If I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, because
that might have something to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, she seems to be the only woman he knew. He knew growing up, because obviously he didn't have any sisters. And
that, and also because, as we learn over the course of the show, his mother wasn't exactly faithful.
Yeah.
And understandably so, because from everything we learn, Rimmer's father sounds like an absolute monster.
He does,
but,
yeah.
Rimmer being who he is, it's.
I mean, to be honest, both his parents sound horrible. But I mean, I kind of have a little more sympathy for his mum, simply because being married to that man and producing 4 sons, it must be hideous,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where, again, it's a little detail that they don't make a big thing out of, but it's very clear on rewatching that when Rimmer goes off to visit, the Admiralty board in the game, and he's having people signing autographs and all that kind of thing, and then his dad shows up, and this was clearly the moment it was kind of he was building up to. It's like, yes, this is my ultimate fantasy, for my dad to be proud of me, and then for him to say, you're a total Smeg head. And the cat comes sort of going, that is the moment where I think it starts to go wrong for him, because it's just that clearly meant to be sort of like a done as sort of like a joke by the cat, but it's that sort of makes him start to come apart and realize, oh, none of this is actually real. At which point,
obviously, it's kind of a little bit the cat's fault, but I'm pretty sure that Rimmer's brain would have done it to him anyway.
I think the cat was as I say, I think this was kind of be an inevitable conclusion, but I think the cat was what was basically the one who lit the fuse, pretty much,
Exactly,
and then Rimmer's
yeah,
brain did
he
all the
might
rest
have,
of
might
the
have
work.
hastened it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right, so let me see. Yeah. So oh yeah. So the bit where we encounter Rimmer and Magruder again, and she's pregnant, and they've suddenly had all these kids and stuff. You know, it's just.
It's that very typical masculine thing, isn't it? Of he wants to be sort of like the jet-setting, suave military man who can do whatever he wants, and then and have sex with whoever he wants, and then he gets Yvonne pregnant, and now he's suddenly tied down and has to give up all the flashy stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, yes. Obviously, I mean, a heterosexual man might have that kind of nightmare as well. But I mean, to me, it just kind of underlines, how it's not actually what he wants, really.
No, he. Well, again, I think the interesting thing as well, and again, on rewatching it, it's because he's not in control. It's very much Yvonne Magruder in the driving seat. She's the one nagging him about, where are the nappy sacks? She's the one saying that, oh, you can't have the Jaguar because it's impractical. Like, everything about him in this episode, it's about his lack of control over his own life and how that manifests as this kind of self-loathing, self-sabotage. Even like right at the end when they seemingly leave the game and they find out he's passed the navigation exam, then the guy from Outland Revenue comes out of the locker and breaks his feet. He doesn't have control over anything, and that's the one thing he can't seem to escape from.
Yes, definitely, yeah, and that's a good way to lead into going back to the book, because obviously in the book, well, for a while at least, he is in control. I mean, to the extent that I noticed on rereading for purposes of the podcast, he's actually hired his father as his chauffeur, and has his.
Again, part of the fantasy. It's not just he wants control over the man who controlled him. So it's very revealing. Yeah.
And he has his father saying, "I'm so proud of you, son. I'm so proud of you."
Yeah, which just, again, knowing who the man is, just feels very kind of hollow. And it's just as funny as this is, it's also just a very, very dark concept. Well, Red Dwarf is full of very, very dark concepts, but this in particular, I think, if they wanted to, and they do in the book, they really could have gone even further with it.
So carrying on talking about the book. I was wondering what you thought about Juanita Shikata.
Remind me which one she is.
Oh yeah, sorry, that's Rimmer's teenage wife in the book.
Oh. Yeah, again, represents
everything he thinks he's supposed to want.
Yeah. Well, again, it's that the heteronormative masculine ideal. I'm the mature man with a very young, attractive wife. It's practically. In fact, that crops up quite a bit sometimes. Like, I think like in series 6, I think Lister. I think it's Gunman in the Apocalypse. I think Lister has a fling with a jailbait ball girl.
Yeah, it's a 17-year-old ball girl. Yeah. I mean, I have to say, Grant Naylor, they weren't particularly bothered about, how do I put this? Sex with teenagers, were they? I mean, we even have Lister losing his virginity age 12 in Maroon.
12, yeah. Which again speaks to his dysfunctional background, but also I think that in some ways ties into the dangers of kind of VR. It's that if you basically have the freedom to do whatever you want, does that mean do morals go out the window? It's like, because none of this is real. This woman isn't real. this teenager isn't real. It's not like I'm hurting anybody. So is it ethically wrong at that point? Or, it just opens up a whole can of worms, and
I think,
obviously comedy,
I
not
think
necessarily going to delve.
I think at this stage, I'm just going to clarify for people who don't live in the UK and who are listening to this, that in the UK the age of consent is 16. So whereas I believe in the US in most places it's 18. So different standards, especially by Grant Naylor writing in the 1980s. They don't consider it as dubious as we might now.
In some ways Red Dwarf is just timeless, and in other ways it's very much of its time. And I, as I get older, rewatching it, as much as I still love the show and will continue to love the show, no doubt, it's always interesting when that clash sort of comes up. How, again, dealing with timeless themes, but then there are moments that are so clearly representative of the attitudes of that time. It is
a very interesting clash, because in some ways it was ahead of its time. In other ways it wasn't.
It's in some ways you could say that about just a lot of sci-fi in general. I think so in some ways that puts Red Dwarf up there with the best of them. Like 2001: A Space Odyssey. There are some aspects of it that's ahead of time, and there are others that are just playing backward. I did want to say it's interesting actually. In the novel, when Rimmer eventually realizes that he is fantasizing, he's incredibly embarrassed, and realize and actually has a moment of self-realization. Oh God, I am totally screwed up. But even Lister is also embarrassed about his Bedford Falls and Kochansky fantasy. They're both embarrassed. It's, if only this episode was an hour long, we could have explored all of this stuff in the show.
Of course, obviously, in Red Dwarf, it isn't a show that sort of tends to have sex scenes or even kind of romantic scenes much. I mean, the most we get is Rimmer and Nirvana in Holoship, and they don't even kiss.
No, it's very. The show is very sex positive in a way, if we're talking about Holoship. But then, as I said, there are other moments where it just seems very strangely regressive as well. It's
kind of odd. I mean, I guess you can kind of see. I mean, well, I don't know whether you know, but I mean, in some of the documentaries, Craig Charles has complained, why is it always the dead guy getting laid?
I suppose it's part of the comedy as well, isn't it? It's that the loser who's a hologram gets more sex than the living, breathing, flesh and blood man.
It is quite funny, isn't it? I mean, really, it's only Nirvana and, of course, Magruder in Better in Life, if you count being in the game, But also, of course, he did. I think there were a couple of. Of course, there was the oiling scene in Terraform.
Yes. The famous
oil. Sex, though. That was just being oiled by two attractive women.
Yeah. Oh, I was sort of looking at that scene for completely different reasons.
Don't worry. So are a lot of Rimmer fans. I mean, even I can't help noticing, because I mean he isn't exactly wearing a lot in that scene. So
Oh, yeah. So, that's my confession. Rimmer is kind of sexy in that episode.
I actually agree. I mean, even though I'm, not that way inclined, I can see the attraction in the episode. I mean, I can see the attraction in a lot of episodes. I mean, even though I'm not, I don't personally want to. I mean, I can see why a lot of fans would be attracted to him. And it's not just his physical attractiveness, which, you know, Chris Barry is an attractive man. It's also obviously the vulnerability, you know, the abusive childhood, etc. I mean, it's all very relatable.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah. I guess whilst we're talking about the book, I do want to briefly talk about Kat's fantasy, which is even less politically correct than Rimmer's. To be honest, I mean, I just kind of find it funny because it's so cartoonishly over the top. I can't take it seriously.
What, like things like the canal?
Where he's got the sort of Valkyrie warrior maidens with massive breasts.
Yeah, and that's that they keep coming back to that as well. It's like I'm thinking in Camille, you know, when you know what do you think Kat's fantasy would be? And Lister sort of goes, you know, it's probably, you know, some Viking woman with a cleavage you could ski down.
Yeah, I think actually they may have written that episode after Better Than Life. So
right, yeah,
it was probably influenced by it. Yeah. The first two books, they were published, I think, before series 3 came out. So yeah, by series 4, then they probably were influenced by the first two novels.
Yeah. But just Kat gets a lot of good gags in this episode. Like I particularly like him trying to play golf.
Oh yeah.
For some reason, he gets into his head that you're meant to throw the club. I don't know how he got to that conclusion, but it's just very funny, and I just any excuse just to see Danny John Jules just acting like a complete clown. Just like the other one as well is him. You know, everyone gets like their fantasy meal, and the cat's is a tub full of goldfish with a fishing rod.
Yeah, it's hilarious. I mean, you know, it's interesting because obviously, you know, Rimmer and Lister's fantasies, you know, kind of reveal their psyches and are kind of angsty in some ways, whereas Kat, angst, what's that? I'm just having a good time.
Yeah. On the other one as well, with his wardrobe that crosses an international time zone.
Yeah.
If it's 8 in the morning for my long johns, it's 7 o'clock for my socks.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do enjoy Kat's relatively angst-free fantasies. Right, okay. We've got 5 minutes left, so let me see. Do you have anything else you particularly wanted to say about this episode? It's okay.
It's just a great sort of Rimmer-centric episode with a really interesting sci-fi concept behind it, and I think it's very much one of the. I think this really is a sign of just how bold Rob Grubb and Doug Naylor had begun to get with the writing. I think, you know, that they weren't just settling for, you know, sitcom plots with a sci-fi backdrop. They were really sort of diving headfirst into some of these sci-fi concepts and using them to explore the characters in greater depth. And yeah, this is a damn good one to do that with.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I agree. Yeah. Oh, I just going to put in a brief word for Tony Hawks, because Tony Hawks is always fun. It's nice to see him here.
Yeah, it was good to see him in the flesh at last after his stint as a vending machine.
Yeah, I mean, my favourite role of his is Caligula. I love that, but you know.
Oh yeah, best of the best, that one.
Yeah, when we get to Meltdown, I will have a good sort of rave about it, because it's one of the highlights of the episode for me. But yeah,
absolutely.
But anyway, right, okay. So this episode, overall score out of 10 and slashiness score out of 10.
Ooh, I think overall it would be an 8. It's a very strong episode. I love the how they explore the characters and their angst, particularly Rimmer, and some of the moments of pathos, like in the observation dome scene. Yeah, I just wish they'd just explored more of the VR elements of it. But yeah, again, it's only a 30-minute episode, you know. They did really well with the time given. In terms of slashiness, I'm going to give it a conservative 6, maybe 7, because again, that observation dome scene, there's no other way of looking at it. It's quite homoerotic.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, underlined by music, yeah.
Yeah, the two guys under a starlit sky talking about their feelings. It's but at the same time, it's when they get into the VR machine, the focus is very much on Rimmer's sexual fantasy with Yvonne Magruder. So I don't want to, go too far with the slashiness. But yeah, I'd say 6 or 7.
Right, okay, thank you. Okay, my slashiness score, I think I'm going to say 7, because as a slash fan, I always kind of up it a bit, I think. And overall score out of 10, I'd say 7 out of 10, because I mean it's a good solid episode, but as I said, I'm trying to leave some scoring space for the for series 5. Right, okay. Right, so and that brings us to the end of this episode of Smeg and the Femmes. Thank you to Hologramette for technical help, and thank you to the Desolated Quil for guesting. It's been nice to have you on.
Thank you. It's been nice being on and talking to you.
I hope you enjoyed listening. If you'd like to give us feedback, you can do so on either Tumblr or Discord on the relevant posts. You can also email us at smegandthefemmes@gmail.com. And the next episode we'll be covering involves a jigsaw, mysterious broken legs, and a drunken hologram. Yes, it'll be thanks for the memory. I hope you'll join us then, but for now, goodbye.